Good afternoon. Thank you for coming along to my talk today. There does seem to be a lot of people that were interested in the percussion workshop that's happening at the same time, but thank you for you guys turning up. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Daniel Lee. I'm in the third year of the PhD program at the University of Tasmania. And today I'll be talking about teaching music educators their role in cultural maintenance. To set the tone of this presentation, I would like to begin with this quote from Winston Churchill. One of the signs of a great society is the diligence with which it passes culture from one generation to the next. My research is examining how, and perhaps how well, this is happening in the context of guitar programs in contemporary popular music courses in Australian tertiary institutions. Before I embark on my presentation, there are some premises that I must illuminate first. One is that music is an integral aspect of culture, and I'm sure I won't get any arguments from anyone here today about that. Second is that canonisation of national music can lead to a sense of national identity, and again, I'm sure no one's going to argue with that, and of course this is well supported in the literature. The third is actually more of a supposition than a premise, and it's based on the previous two, and that is therefore educators of musicians and educators of music teachers have significant roles in defining society by how diligently they influence the cultural identities of subsequent generations. So, first of all, a quick history of the scope of my study. The first bachelor degree level course in Australia where a student could major in popular music performance with the guitar as their primary instrument was offered in 1986 by the Northern Rivers College of Advanced Education. The current iteration of this same course is now delivered by Southern Cross University at their campus in Lismore. In the year 2000, Michael Hanan produced a report on the then current state of tertiary CPM education in Australia. At that time, there were 3 courses offered around Australia, plus a few more that offered what Hanan described as services to the industry. They included single units in popular music or home studio recording or marketing, etc. At the time of data collection for my study, semester 1, 2018, there were 25 courses that fit the criteria. They can be found in every capital city of every state and territory, except the Northern Territory, and also in a couple of rural locations. Now, the course there offered by Central Queensland University at their campus in Mackay can be undertaken completely online, or it can be undertaken face-to-face or in a blended learning mode. And the course there at the University of New England in Armidale is in fact only offered in an online mode. There's no face-to-face delivery option in that course. Another, I guess it's a premise of my research that is that music education is capable of playing a significant role in cultural preservation. Now, this is supported by research in Asia, Africa and South America, where westernisation is a concern and music education is being used to combat the onward march of unwarranted enculturation. Alonso, using a strong metaphor, described the adoption of Western musical practices in Brazil as a cannibalisation of the traditional musics. And Sharon Saidon's research in Malaysia revealed that the protection of the nation's cultural heritage is being further challenged by the educational foci on science and technology. They concluded that music education was having less of a cultural influence as this focus has developed. My study can most simply be described as an ethnography. However, it can be more accurately described as a phenomeноgraphically oriented, multi-sited, distance, online, comparative ethnography. Now, it's phenomenographic as I'm interested in the perceptions of the participants, and this is a phenomenographic issue. It's multi-sited as the courses are offered at 28 locations around Australia, and normally in an ethnography you would go and visit the sites and immerse yourself in the culture. Now, that's not really practical with 28 locations. So it's a distance ethnography as I'm investigating the courses from my home office in the Adelaide Hills, and the institutions are in some cases therefore thousands of kilometres from my base. It's an online ethnography because I'm using 21st century communication technologies to conduct my research, and I'm also asking questions about the use of 21st century communication technologies within the courses. And it's a comparative ethnography, as I'm comparing the 25 different courses and also comparing the perspectives of the different participant strata. I collected data from human participants in the form of online surveys and interviews, and I also collected unit descriptors for every unit in every course pertaining to performance or guitar, including both core units and elective units, plus any other units that were deemed to be possibly relevant to the research questions. Analysis was conducted using the procedures and protocols of inductive and thematic analysis, as laid out by Brown and Clark, Sarantakos and Bryman. Now, these are not the actual research questions for my PhD research project. These are other questions that arose during the inductive process that I thought were worthy of investigation, hence today's presentation. Now, another premise of the study is that graduates of CPM courses engage with music communities and that this engagement includes education. The literature suggests that this is the case, and my study supports this. I found 71% of my alumni participants were active in some form of portfolio career, and 45% of them were teaching in some form or another, as exemplified by these survey responses. I also found that educators were aware of this and were steering their course design to accommodate or even promote this. My data shows that most CPM educators are not only aware of their role as purveyors of national aesthetics, but that some of them were also keenly interested in it. However, this was not unanimous. It was also not the consensus among students' experiences that the institutions are performing in this role successfully. In answer to the question regarding if a national aesthetic in CPM guitar was observed by affiliates within the Australian CPM courses, there was one artist or ensemble that stood out in the data as most prominent. When I further investigated what it is about AC/DC's music that was most significant, their sense of rhythm was the most noticeable response. It was described as something that was very hard to define using traditional musicological terminology, and although AC/DC's music might seem simple at one level, it becomes more sophisticated when you try to replicate it, and especially so when you try to teach someone else to replicate it. This sense of rhythm was found to be a feature common to all Australian CPM guitar performance practices, and it was also found to be a strong and important feature of Indigenous Australian contemporary popular music guitar playing. One of the themes developed from the data in my study is the concept of be yourself. This seems to be a prominent Australianism and has grown from a push in the late 1960s and the early 70s from governmental agencies for a greater focus on Australian voice across the arts. So in the film industry, in literature, poetry, and of course art and music, there was a push to be Australian. However, the push back from the rock and roll industry and other art forms, I guess, as well, but noticeably among the rock and roll artists, was not so much as be Australian as be yourself. This was observed to be being outworked in the courses predominantly through incorporating various levels and styles of student autonomy. So a couple of examples of how autonomy is working in CPM courses. One is by what could be called guided autonomy, where students are given free choice of material, but within certain parameters. These are often stylistic or to meet certain curricular outcomes. Or, for example, a private tutor will give students a choice of material, all of which was selected by the tutor to steer the students in a particular direction, but then give the students the opportunity to explore those directions. Another form of autonomy is what I have described as autonomy quotients, where students are expected to perform, and it was most typically found to be 50%, they're expected to perform certain quotients of their performance assessments from a set list or other curricular guidelines, and then they were given free choice for the rest. And it was also found that most courses were pretty flexible and allowed students to negotiate, often within reason, choice of repertoire and or stylistic or aesthetic preferences. For the courses to pass culture from one generation to the next, as Churchill commended, there must be an engagement with cultural capital. This is typical of traditional music educational paradigms where students are taught to replicate musics of the past and interpretation is kept at a minimum. However, this does not seem to be a prominent practice in most CPM courses. There is evidence in the data of the performance of cover songs as a common feature of curricular assessment tasks. However, in most cases, there's also an element of artistic interpretation encouraged. So what is the role of teaching cover songs in CPM courses from the perspective of my research and the data and the literature? Well, it certainly gives a vocational foundation for the students to perform in the industry where cover songs are expected. It also has a self-evident role in cultural preservation if the local songs are the ones being included in the curricula, but not so much if compositions from external cultures are being employed. Careful regard of curricular material is therefore an important factor if cultural preservation is a consideration for the curriculum design. However, performance of cover songs can lead to a sense of a lack of authenticity if students are encouraged to abandon their own voice in the pursuit of replication. One method being employed to balance this is the use of students' original compositions in the curricula. This was found to be almost ubiquitous among Australian CPM courses, with all but one course explicitly stating original compositions were an assessment requirement. Original compositions can further the Australian voice by building on the existing cultural platform. However, if expectations of compositions are not taught in conjunction with teaching existing cultural capital, there is a risk of disconnect, as the products may be unrelated to the pre-existing Australian voice. The pre-existing voice has been found to be strongly influenced by Anglo-American sources. Should there, therefore, be expectations that the students' compositional products continue this tradition and aesthetic flavour, or should there be an engagement with broader cultural influences, which may be reflecting current trends in the 21st century here in Australia? There's also the question regarding international students. If international students are enrolled in Australian CPM courses, can their compositional products be considered Australian compositions and therefore regarded as adding to the national cultural capital? Returning to the earlier premise that graduates of these courses will perpetuate the culture by engaging in education as one aspect of their income stream, we should also examine pedagogical practices in CPM. Green's work on popular music education parallels with much Australian research, including research conducted by affiliates within the courses under investigation in my study. There is a complex milieu between informal and formal practices and deliberate and unintentional outcomes, all of which is way beyond the scope of today's presentation. If you're interested, I strongly encourage anyone to read Green's work if you haven't already. Much literature supports the notion that we teach the way we learned, and this is in fact further supported by research, particularly in the field of popular music education. Some of the Australian CPM courses are modelled on the conservatoire model with concessions to popular music idioms, and some are completely unrelated to that model, and some include pedagogies similar to Green's. So, what do I think of the outcomes of my research? I think we need to improve awareness of the potential for cultural propagation via music education, so this is at least in the framework of course design. Many nations, including the ones I mentioned earlier, have observed this unwanted enculturation from the West. Is Australia really any different? We might see ourselves as Westerners, however, we have a unique identifiable voice as a subcultural entity within the broader Western cultural categorisation. If this is not understood and then preserved, it could easily be lost and absorbed, especially with the influence of 21st century communications technologies. There is certainly room for more research on Australian CPM, including what are its defining features from both a local and global perspective, including also looking at the guitar but other instruments as well. What are the performance practices of keyboard players, singers, bass players, drummers? There should be a balance of Australian CPM heritage and cultural development, in course design considerations and in course curricula. Thank you for listening. Does anybody have any questions?